Let's kick things off with a little riddle. One that ties together some of the most common and, let's be honest, some of the most confusing questions we see in the tech world.
So what's the connection? Well, they're all at the heart of these tech mysteries that, on the surface, seem super complicated. But once you break them down, they're actually pretty simple. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now.
All right, we've got 4 big topics on the docket. First, we're going to solve the 4K video paradox. Why does that super high-res video look so amazing on your regular HD screen? Then we're going to talk about some unwelcome visitors that might be living inside your monitor. Seriously. After that, we'll dive into a classic budget gaming GPU showdown. And to wrap it all up, we are going to bust the great VRAM myth and figure out if more is really better. Okay, let's start with something I bet you've noticed yourself. You fire up a 4K video on your standard 1080p, your full HD screen, and it looks sharper, cleaner than a normal 1080p video. How is that even possible? It sounds like it shouldn't work, but the answer isn't some kind of magic, it's all about the data. The secret ingredient here is something called bitrate. The easiest way to think about bitrate is to imagine it as the information density that's packed into every single second of the video you're watching. So, a higher bitrate means more data, and that translates directly into more detailed, better colors, and just a crisper image overall. So here's how it plays out. A video that's made in 4K is almost always created with a way, way higher bitrate than a standard full HD video. So when your 1080p screen gets that 4K source, yeah, it has to shrink it down, but it's starting with this incredibly rich, dense pile of data. The end result? A much sharper, more detailed picture compared to a video that was kind of data poor from the get-go. To really put this in perspective, a single frame of a true 4K video contains the information for about 8 million pixels.
Your full HD screen, on the other hand, it only has 2 million physical pixels. That means there's just no physical room to show you the other 6 million pixels of detail. All that extra information just gets crunched down and averaged out.
So what's the final verdict? Yes, the higher bitrate from that 4K source is absolutely why it looks better on your 1080p screen. But don't get it twisted, you are still losing a massive amount of detail. To see all 8 million of those pixels doing their thing, you really do need a native 4K display. Period. All right, moving on to our next question, and this one is without a doubt the weirdest. It sounds like the setup to a bad joke, but I promise you it's a real and a really frustrating problem. You have an ant, or maybe a bunch of ants, that have decided to move inside the layers of your monitor. Okay, if this nightmare happens to you, the number one most important thing is what you do first. Whatever you do, do not try to fix it yourself. Prying open a modern monitor is a super delicate job, and you will instantly 100% void any warranty you have. So if it's still under warranty, the answer is easy. Take it to an official service center. They'll know what to do. If the warranty is up, you need to find a professional repair shop that knows their way around electronics. Of course, the absolute best solution is just don't let it happen in the first place. And lucky for us, the steps are really simple. First, just keep your workspace clean. And please, avoid eating at your desk, because all those little crumbs are basically a giant welcome sign for pests. Also, try to keep the humidity in the room low if you can. Ants and other bugs are always on the lookout for warm, dry, dark places to build a nest. And you know what? The inside of your monitor is pretty much a 5-star hotel for them. All right, from pest control, let's shift gears to PC building. We're going to tackle a classic problem for anyone trying to build a gaming PC on a budget. You've got 2 graphics cards. They're at a similar price. In this corner, you've got the AMD RX 6600, and in the other, NVIDIA's RTX 3050, so which one should you buy? Look, if your number one goal is playing games, this isn't even a close fight. The RX 6600 offers excellent performance for the price. It's actually competing with the more expensive RTX 3060. The RTX 3050's gaming performance, to put it bluntly, is poor. Now, where the 3050 does have a bit of an edge is versatility. NVIDIA's whole ecosystem is generally a bit better if you're mixing professional work with your gaming, but for a pure gaming machine, the choice is crystal clear. You know, the source material just says it perfectly. If you are buying a graphics card to play games, the RX 6600 is an automatic choice. It's not even a debate in this price range. It just gives you so much more raw performance for your money right where you need it most. And for our last topic, we're going to take a sledgehammer to one of the biggest, most stubborn myths in the world of PC hardware. And that's the idea that when you're talking about VRAM, video memory, that more is always better. So let's just ask the question straight up. You see two graphics cards on the shelf. One has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, the other has 12. Is the 16 gigabyte card automatically the more powerful, the better choice for gaming? The answer is a loud, definite no, not at all. And to get why, you have to understand what these two things actually do. The GPU core, that's the engine of your graphics card. It's the powerhouse that actually creates the frames, that gives you higher FPS, and that smooth gameplay you're looking for. VRAM, on the other hand, it's more like a buffer. It's a temporary storage space that holds all the game's textures and assets so the engine can grab them really fast. Let's look at a perfect real-world example. You've got the RTX 4060 Ti with 16 gigs of VRAM. It's got this massive data buffer, but the engine, the GPU core itself, is pretty weak in comparison. It's just not powerful enough to play games at settings that would ever need all that VRAM. Now compare that to the RTX 4070. Yeah, it has less VRAM at 12 gigs, but its engine is way more powerful and is perfectly balanced for that amount of VRAM. It is going to give you a much, much better gaming experience. And hey, this isn't just theory. This is a real story from a user. They fell for the numbers game. They bought the card with more VRAM, and they were so let down by the actual in-game performance that they sold it just 2 weeks later and got the card with the stronger core instead. So here's a much healthier way to think about this. That huge amount of VRAM on a mid-range card, it's not a bargain that makes it better for gaming. A lot of the time, it's a marketing gimmick playing on that bigger number must be better idea. In reality, it's more like an insurance policy for really specific professional jobs, like AI development or heavy 3D rendering, that actually can use all that memory. For gaming, the engine is what you should be focused on. And that brings us to the final question, something for you to think about the next time you're staring at a spec sheet. Are you paying for performance that you can actually feel, that makes your games run better? Or are you just paying for a bigger number printed on the side of a box?
Why do we sometimes feel like a 4K movie looks noticeably sharper on a regular full HD screen than a native full HD video, even though the display physically cannot show those extra pixels? It's a common confusion, right? And today we're diving into the hidden factors that affect perceived quality. Plus, we tackle some sticky technical debates, literally and figuratively. We'll get into the illusion of resolution, physical hardware intrusions.
Yeah, ants. And that eternal VRAM battle in GPUs.
Yeah, it's one of those things that seems counterintuitive, but it really gets to the heart of how digital video works. It's almost like an optical illusion, but it's rooted in, well, data flow, not just the screen specs you read on the box. You, the listener, you've probably seen this yourself. You switch a YouTube video or a stream from 1080p up to 4K on your standard full HD monitor, and somehow it just looks better. Sharper? Maybe. Exactly. My screen, it's only got about 2 million pixels, right? 1920 by 1080. A 4K image has, what, over 8 million? So my monitor physically cannot display all that extra detail. So if the hardware is the bottleneck, where does this feeling of better quality actually come from? It feels a bit like magic.
Hey, no magic, but definitely some interesting math and processing going on. Let's break down the numbers first because they set the stage. A full HD screen, 1080p, is 1920 by 1080 pixels. That's just over 2 million dots of light. A 4K source, usually 3840 by 2160, is about 8.3 million dots. The hardware limit is absolute. When that 4K signal hits your 1080p monitor, the graphics card or the monitor's internal scaler has to throw away or combine information. Roughly 6 million pixels worth of the original data gets, well, averaged out or discarded to make it fit.
Right, so detail is lost. That's a certainty. The 4K image gets downscaled, or sometimes they call it co-scaled, I think, basically shrunk to fit my 1080p panel. So the big question remains, if the image quality can't actually exceed the screen's native resolution and we know detail is being lost, why does it look better?
Okay, here's the crucial part, the thing that usually explains this perceived difference. It's almost always the bitrate, not the resolution itself, at least not directly on that lower res screen. See, we're kind of trained to think higher resolution equals higher quality overall. And streaming platforms, rendering software, they play into that. They typically assign a much higher bitrate to the 4K version of a video compared to the 1080p version.
Okay, let me unpack that. So clicking 4K on, say, YouTube isn't just telling it, I want more pixels my screen can't show. It's actually telling it to send me a much fatter data pipe for that video. And if I hypothetically had two video files, one labeled 4K, one 1080p, but I rendered them with the exact same high bitrate and the same codec, they'd look identical on my 1080p monitor.
Precisely. You hit the nail on the head. You think you're selecting resolution, but what you're really getting is a higher quality stream associated with that resolution setting, more data per second. That higher bitrate means the video compression algorithm doesn't have to work as hard, doesn't have to throw away as much information to meet its target file size or streaming rate.
And what does that look like visually? Less compression. What does my eye pick up on?
The most obvious thing is fewer compression artifacts. Think about color banding. You know when you see a smooth gradient like a blue sky or a foggy scene, and instead of being smooth, it looks like distinct, ugly rings or steps of color.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Especially in dark areas too, sometimes it looks all blocky.
That's it. That's macro blocking in the shadows and color banding in the gradients. Low bitrate causes that. The higher bitrate tied to the 4K stream usually preserves those subtle color transitions much better and keeps the shadows cleaner. So even after the image gets downscaled from 8 million pixels to 2 million, the 2 million pixels you do see are carrying cleaner, more accurate color and shading information. That gives you the impression of greater clarity and detail, even if the pixel count is the same.
That makes a lot more sense than just magic pixels appearing.
And we even have historical proof of this. Remember YouTube's Stats for Nerds panel? It used to show the actual stream bitrate. If you were on a 1080p monitor and you flipped the quality setting from 1080p to 4K, you'd instantly see the bitrate number jump way up. That higher data flow was delivering the perceived quality boost, even though the resolution itself wasn't changing on your end. 4K acted as a proxy for give me the good stuff.
Right, so it's the data, not just the label. This whole bitrate thing leads nicely into the difference between streaming quality and like the absolute best possible quality, right, on online streaming versus local files. Because even 4K streaming, it's still heavily compressed, isn't it, to make it work over the internet for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. Streaming services have to compress aggressively. They're balancing quality against bandwidth limitations, server load, making sure millions of people can watch without buffering constantly. If you want the true uncompromised reference-grade 4K experience, you really have to bypass streaming. You need the full file, usually something ripped from a Blu-ray disc. The file sizes alone tell the story.
Yeah, the outline mentions some crazy numbers, like 20-30 gigabytes for a standard 4K movie file. And some extended editions, like Avatar, hitting 62 gigs. That's enormous.
62 gigabytes for one film. I remember when my entire computer didn't have that much storage. It really puts into perspective how much data gets stripped out for streaming. And when you actually compare watching a typical 4K stream versus playing that massive local file, honestly, it's often a night and day difference. The image is so much cleaner, no banding, no blockiness, and the audio, the sound is usually vastly better too because it hasn't been crunched down for the web.
It's a whole different experience, which I guess brings us to the hardware itself. You need good hardware to even play these massive files smoothly. But sometimes the hardware problems aren't about performance. They're about physical integrity. And this next topic is, well, it's a bit creepy crawly.
It is a strange pivot, isn't it? From digital compression artifacts to literal bugs. We're talking about the surprisingly common issue of ants or other tiny insects actually getting inside computer monitors and nesting there.
Get out. Seriously, inside the screen. How does that even happen? And why would they want to be in there? It sounds like a terrible place for an ant.
It sounds awful to us, but think about it from the ant's perspective. This problem is mostly seen in standard LCD and IPS monitors, less so in OLEDs. The reason is construction. There's often a tiny microscopic gap between the actual display panel layers and the outer protective casing or bezel. It's just part of manufacturing tolerances. But for a tiny ant, that gap is like an open door.
Okay, so they can get in, but why?
Attraction. A monitor that's been running is warm, sometimes quite hot. Importantly, it's dry inside. Especially in humid environments, insects like ants are constantly seeking warm, dry, protected spaces. The inside of your monitor. Perfect little microclimate for them. It's shelter. OLEDs tend to be sealed more tightly, so they have less of this issue.
Wow, okay, so it's not just one lost ant wandering across the screen we're talking about. They could actually set up shop in there. What kind of damage can they cause?
It can be pretty bad. The most immediate thing is you might see what looks like a stuck or dead pixel. If an ant, unfortunately, expires inside the panel, its body can block the light, creating a dark spot. Or worse, if their waste products or bodily fluids get onto the sensitive internal electronics or coatings, it can cause corrosion or even short circuits at a tiny level. Even a live ant crawling between the layers is incredibly distracting and looks like a moving dead pixel. It ruins the viewing experience, and the potential for long-term damage is real.
Yikes. Okay, so if you see this, the first instinct might be panic. Maybe grab some tweezers, try to open the monitor.
No, Absolutely not. That's the critical warning here. Do not try to fix this yourself. Don't open the monitor case. Don't try to poke or press on the screen to squash the ant. Monitor panels are incredibly delicate. The moment you try to open that chassis yourself, you will void the warranty instantly.
Yeah.
And if you damage the panel, the ribbon cables, anything, you're paying for a brand new monitor out of pocket.
So the only safe route, if it's under warranty, is take it straight to the official service center.
That's the best option. A certified warranty center has the proper tools, the clean environment, and the training to safely disassemble the monitor, clean out the intruder, and reassemble it without causing further damage. That's the ideal scenario.
What if the warranty's expired? Are you just stuck with an ant farm in your screen?
Not necessarily, but your options are more limited. You'd need to find a specialized local electronics repair shop. You know, the kind of place that handles complex component-level repairs. The outline mentioned examples like specific streets in Hanoi known for this, like Dathon Nig or Tai Ha. Most big cities have similar areas or shops that specialize in tricky electronics repair. But you have to be realistic. The quality and environment probably won't match a factory service center. It's a bit of a gamble.
Which really means the best strategy is avoiding the problem in the first place. Prevention.
Absolutely. Prevention is everything here. First, keep your workspace clean. Really clean. No crumbs, no spilled drinks. Second, and this is key, avoid eating near your monitor, especially sugary stuff. Ants are drawn to food sources, and once they find one near that warm, dry monitor, well, they're going to explore their new potential home. Also, controlling room humidity can help. If your room is less humid, the dry interior of the monitor might be slightly less attractive as a refuge.
Keep it clean, keep food away. Got it. Okay, let's shift gears again, back from physical pests to digital performance. Time for a classic hardware matchup, the GPU showdown. We're looking at the AMD RX 6600 versus the NVIDIA RTX 3050, specifically the 8GB version of the 3050, because they often end up around the same price point these days.
Right, and if we're talking purely about gaming performance frames per second, how smooth your games run, this is actually a very straightforward comparison. The immediate verdict. For gaming, the RX 6600 basically closes the door in the RTX 3050. It offers significantly better performance than the money you spend.
Wow, closes the door. That's pretty definitive. Why such a big gap? Are they just built differently?
Fundamentally, yes. They're not really in the same performance tier, architecturally speaking. The RX 6600 is just a more powerful chip overall. Honestly, benchmarking the 6600 against the 3050 feels a bit unfair to the 3050. The 6600 should really be compared against the next step up in NVIDIA's line, the RTX 3060. It's that much stronger. The 6600 has more compute units, better memory bandwidth configuration. The 3050 was often seen as a bit cut down, even within its own family, particularly with its memory bus.
So more raw horsepower for just churning out frames in games.
Exactly. The RX 6600 really shines in modern games, especially those using newer APIs like DirectX 12 or Vulkan. It's a great card for high refresh rate 1080p gaming. And the key thing is the value. If you can find an RX 6600 at roughly the same price as an RTX 3050 HEB, it's an incredible performance bargain for gamers. You're getting near 3060 performance for 3050 money.
Okay, but there must be some reason someone would still pick the 3050, right? Otherwise, why would NVIDIA even sell it at that price? This brings us to the NVIDIA trade-off. Maybe less raw power, but more features or versatility.
That's the angle. The 3050 does have some points in its favor, but they're more niche. Its main advantage lies in productivity or creative tasks. NVIDIA's ecosystem, especially CEDA for GPU acceleration, is generally more mature and better supported in a lot of professional software rendering, video editing, AI workloads. AMD is catching up, but NVIDIA often still has the edge there.
And the upscaling tech? DLSS versus FSR, that's always a big talking point.
Crucial point, yes. The 3050 supports NVIDIA's DLSS. DLSS uses AI and dedicated hardware, tensor cores, on the GPU to upscale a lower resolution image, boosting performance. And generally speaking, DLSS currently produces a visually superior result compared to AMD's FSR. DLSS often looks sharper, has fewer motion artifacts, less ghosting or shimmering. FSR is AMD's open source alternative, which is great because it works on almost any card, including the 3050. But visually, DLSS usually wins the comparison right now. FSR can sometimes look a bit softer or blurrier.
But the 3050 has limitations even with NVIDIA features, right? Like frame generation?
Big limitation, yeah. The 3050 doesn't support NVIDIA's true hardware-accelerated frame generation, which is a feature on higher-end RTS cards that can dramatically boost FPS by inserting AI-generated frames. The 3050 has to rely on FSR3's frame generation if a game supports it, or just DLSS upscaling alone. Meanwhile, the RX 6600, while lacking DLSS, just powers through with its stronger raw performance. It delivers the frames the traditional way by just being faster.
So the bottom line on this showdown seems pretty clear. If gaming is your main thing, especially high FPS at 1080p, RX 6600 is the easy pick if prices are similar. But if you do a lot of CUDA accelerated work, or if you really value the slightly better image quality of DLSS upscaling over FSR, then the 3050 is, well, it's an option, but you're knowingly sacrificing a lot of gaming power.
That's a perfect summary. It's a classic performance versus features trade-off. And that very trade-off leads us perfectly into the next big debate. VRAM. How much video memory do you actually need versus how powerful the main GPU chip itself is?
Right. The VRAM versus GPU core debate, capacity or muscle. We see graphics cards advertised with huge amounts of VRAM, sometimes 12 GB, 16 GB, even more. But then there are cards with less VRAM that cost more. So for the average user, especially gamers, what matters most for that actual feeling of smooth gameplay? The gigabytes of VRAM or the raw speed of the GPU core itself?
For the vast majority, particularly for gaming, the GPU core strength is king. Think of the core as the engine of the graphics card. It's what actually processes the graphics instructions, calculates the lighting, renders the polygons. Its speed directly determines your frames per second, your FPS. That's what dictates how smooth and responsive a game feels. That's the kemnyuntukta, the real-world experience.
Okay, so what's the VRAM for then? If the core is the engine, what's the VRAM?
VRAM, video RAM, is like the engine's super fast workbench or staging area. It's specialized memory right there on the graphics card, where the GPU core keeps all the data it needs immediate access to. This includes things like high-resolution textures for characters and environments, geometry data, shadow maps, buffers for anti-aliasing, all the assets for the scene being rendered. It needs to be large enough to hold everything the core is actively working on.
So it's essential, but having more VRAM doesn't automatically make the core work faster.
Exactly. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient for speed on its own. Think of it like system RAM in your computer. Having 64 GB of RAM doesn't make your CPU faster if your tasks only need 16 GB. More VRAM is like having a bigger workbench. If your current projects only need a small bench, having a giant one doesn't make you build things faster. But if you try to build something huge on a tiny bench, you'll constantly be swapping things around, and that will slow you down.
Okay, so for gaming, VRAM acts more like insurance, making sure the workbench is big enough so the game doesn't stutter or crash because it runs out of space for textures and stuff.
That's a great way to put it. Insurance against stutters or needing to lower texture quality settings. For most gaming today, especially 1080p or even 1440p, current VRAM amounts like 8 GB or 12 GB are generally pretty well balanced and sufficient. So the advice is usually, prioritize getting the strongest GPU core you can afford within your budget. A faster core can still deliver high FPS even if the VRAM usage gets close to its limit sometimes.
But what about future-proofing? I hear that all the time. People say, get the 16 GB card now because games in 2 years will need it. Is there truth to that?
That's the marketing spin, and it preys on a fear of obsolescence. The reality is more complicated. We need to talk about tasks being core-bound versus VRAM-bound. Gaming, for the most part, is core-bound. The performance limit is usually the speed of the GPU core long before you completely fill up even 12 GB or 16 GB of VRAM at reasonable settings. But certain non-gaming tasks are absolutely VRAM-bound.
Okay, tell me about those. Where does VRAM capacity become the absolute bottleneck?
Think about really demanding professional workloads, training large AI models, running complex scientific simulations, rendering huge, intricate 3D scenes for movies with tons of ultra-high-res textures, working with massive data sets in data science. These tasks need to load enormous amounts of data into the GPU's memory all at once. If the data set or model size physically exceeds the card's VRAM capacity, say, you try to load a 15 GB AI model onto a card with only 12 GB of VRAM, the process will either slow to a crawl as it constantly swaps data with slower system RAM, or it will just fail outright. The VRAM capacity is the hard limit, regardless of how fast the core is.
That distinction is key, and it perfectly sets up the example the source material used to show how gamers can fall into the VRAM trap. Let's talk about that hypothetical RTX 5060 Ti with 16 GB versus an RTX 5070 with 12 GB.
Ah, yes, the classic Monho, the perceived bargain. Someone sees the 5060 Ti has 16 GB of VRAM and costs less than the 5070 with only 12 GB. They think, wow, more memory for less money. This is amazing value. It'll last longer.
But then reality bites. The Vamang, the broken dreams moment, as the source called it. What happens when they actually try to game on that 16 GB 5060 Ti?
The dream shatters because the 5060 Ti's GPU core is significantly weaker than the 5070's core. In almost all gaming scenarios, that weaker core hits its performance limit. It just can't process graphics fast enough to generate high FPS long before the game actually uses anywhere near 16 GB of VRAM. You might be using, say, 10 GB of VRAM, but the core is already maxed out, giving you maybe 60 FPS. The extra 6 GB of VRAM capacity is just sitting there, unused, doing nothing to improve your experience.
So it's like having a car with a massive fuel tank but a tiny underpowered engine. It can hold a lot of fuel, but it still can't go very fast.
Exactly that. Meanwhile, the RTX 5070, even with 4 GB less VRAM, 12 GB total, has a much more powerful engine, a stronger core. It can process graphics much faster. So in the same game, even if it's also using 10 GB of VRAM, its powerful core might be delivering 90 FPS. That's a vastly smoother, more enjoyable experience. The 12 GB is sufficient for the task, and the stronger core delivers the performance. Source material rightly pointed out that cards like the 5070, 12 GB, or maybe a future 5080, 16 GB, are examples where the VRAM is better matched to the core's capability.
So that 16 GB 5060 Ti, who is it actually for? It seems like a trap for gamers. Does it have a legitimate purpose?
It does, but it's a niche product, a gotcha card, for a very specific user. It's for someone doing those VRAM-bound tasks we talked about, maybe training AI models that require just over 12 GB. But they absolutely cannot afford the much more expensive 5080 or 5090 that also has 16 GB or more. They know they are buying a card with a relatively weak core for its VRAM pool. They are making a conscious trade-off, accepting lower processing speed, which might mean longer training times, to get the bare minimum VRAM capacity they need just to run their specific workload at all within their tight budget.
Okay, so it's for a specialist who prioritizes capacity over speed due to absolute necessity and budget constraints. But the average gamer doesn't understand this nuance.
Right, precisely. And the anecdote confirms it. Many gamers who bought that hypothetical 5060 Ti 16 GB based purely on the more VRAM is better idea ended up disappointed with the actual gaming performance. They realized the core was holding them back, sold the card, and likely upgraded to the 5070, finally understanding the core strength was what really mattered for their primary use case: smooth, high FPS gaming.
It really hammers home the final thought, doesn't it? This constant trade-off. We saw it historically with cards like the 3060 12 GB versus the faster 3060 Ti 8 GB. You often have to choose. Do you want the raw frame rate muscle from the core, or do you need that extra VRAM capacity for specific, often non-gaming tasks?
It's the fundamental decision.
Right.
And understanding which side of that equation matters to you is crucial.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot today in this deep dive. We figured out why 4K might look better on your 1080p screen. Spoiler, it's usually the bitrate. We learned about the unsettling possibility of ants in your monitor and why prevention is key. And we navigated the GPU battlefield, comparing the RX 6600 and RTX 3050, which led us right into that crucial VRAM versus core strength debate. Ultimately, whether you lean towards capacity or raw speed really hinges on what you actually do with your hardware. But for most gamers, it seems like the core power is where the real-world satisfaction lies.
Which brings up a really interesting final question, thinking back to that 3060 versus 3060 Ti history. The 3060 12 GB became hugely popular, almost as the people's champion, partly because it offered so much VRAM for its price, even though the 3060 Ti was faster. Now imagine if today, that older but faster 3060 Ti 8 GB was still widely available brand new, right alongside the 3060 12 GB, forcing a direct choice. Would buyers, knowing what we know now about core importance for gaming, still gravitate towards the 12 GB of the 3060 for that perceived future-proofing? Or would the demonstrably superior gaming core of the 3060 Ti finally win the popular vote?
That's a great question to ponder. Think about that trade-off yourself. Because understanding what truly defines value in your tech, whether it's hidden data rates, raw processing power, or sheer memory capacity, that's the real shortcut to making informed decisions and getting the most out of your hardware.
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.